Oh, so the New York Times has published what I consider to be a very controversial article. And unfortunately, it has been picked up by most of the major media around the world, including places that should be, I think, a lot more skeptical of the source. And this is always a problem with the Times, because the Times is still considered the newspaper record. And look, as mainstream media goes, it does tend to be a fairly trustworthy source to the extent that most of what it reports is true. And a lot of times it does strive for accuracy to the extent it can, and underneath the sort of editorial slant that it tends to put on things. But we do know that the Times has been guilty in the past of fabricating stories or insufficient, shall we say, insufficient editorial oversight that allowed false stories to come out that were very, very damaging. I mean, we can go back to the Iraq War and how big a role the Times coverage, mostly with Judith Miller, but also with other reporters, played in promoting the false idea of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq that, and the result of that is tremendous, right? We can talk more recently about its coverage of the question of sexual assaults during the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel, and all that that promoted. There is an area where there's still a lot that is gray, but clearly we know that a lot of what the Times reported turned out to be false. So people should be more skeptical, and I think this article in particular should be drawing a lot more skepticism than it is. And unfortunately, during times of war, people tend to abandon their critical thinking, and it can be very dangerous. So the article claims that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has been pushing U.S. President Donald Trump to continue the war on Iran, not to look for an off ramp, not to look for a ceasefire, given the state of affairs right now. Um, that is a big deal because, it's one thing, it could be if this was just a question of Trump hearing advice from somebody, that's fine. The problem is that this guy is, Trump, I mean, is an idiot. He is easily manipulated. Um, it's sort of ironic, but it's not unusual that scammers are themselves easily scammed. Grifters are themselves easily grifted. They play on other people's vulnerabilities in that regard because they themselves are familiar with those vulnerabilities, especially when they're not too bright, like Trump. So uh, we already know, I think, that one way or another, the cajoling and the influence and the convincing of Benjamin Netanyahu certainly was a major factor. Let's be as conservative about it as possible. It was certainly a major factor in getting Trump to begin this war in the first place. Uh, and Netanyahu did nothing, as far as anyone knows, any different than he's done with all the previous presidents that Netanyahu has met with and tried to convince to do this, and all the other ones were not stupid enough to say yes. So it's dangerous if indeed MBS is pressing Trump to continue the war. The problem is it doesn't make any sense. For one thing, as I'll explain in a moment, but also the sourcing on this story is incredibly suspect. So all of this, the entire story in the Times and in every single media outlet that has repeated it since, which is a lot. Um, the sourcing is, as it stands right now, and I'm quoting the article here. It is according to people briefed by American officials on the conversations. So it's somebody told somebody who told somebody who told somebody who told the reporter. Does that sound like a basis for something this important that you want to put in the so-called newspaper record? I would certainly, if I was an editor, say we got to do better than this. We got to get somebody at least be able to say, even if they're going to stay anonymous, at least be able to say we confirmed this with a senior administration official. Just keep them anonymous, but say that's some kind of confirmation. But no, there isn't. And I think it's also telling because the original article, the one that I quoted a few days ago in an article that I drafted about this very subject, didn't describe the source that way. Here's how it was originally described. It was, quote, people who have had conversations with American officials. So it was even more vague um, in the original printing. It was even, I mean, it was the same, it communicates the same thing, but the wording was even vaguer because who the hell are these American officials? Is it somebody, working in the mailroom? We don't know. We don't know who these people are. There are many, many layers at the White House and many, many layers at the State Department. And I got to tell you, I mean, having spent a lot of time talking with people in those places over the years, people at lower levels don't know things necessarily. They might talk to a reporter based on scuttlebutt they heard. They might talk to a reporter based on a rumor that they heard. They might, and I think this is what happened here, talk to a reporter because they were told to do that by their boss. In any case, the sourcing is very, very dubious. So, on top of that, the article itself actually describes why it would not be in the best interest of Saudi Arabia for MBS to do this, for MBS to try to push Trump into prolonging the war on Iran. It notes that if the war goes on too long and the government collapses with nothing to replace it, you have a failed state sort of situation, which would be a disaster for the whole region, and everybody realizes that. Um, Also, and I think more to the point, even if you're going to argue that there is some way that the Iranian state could still function if you destroyed the Islamic Republic, dragging this war on is going to make the Iranians more desperate. It's going to make them take more severe steps to try and survive, which means they're going to target the energy infrastructure throughout the region, particularly in the Gulf. And a major target of that will be Saudi Arabia, and we're already seeing that the defenses against Iranian attacks. People love to talk about how many fewer missiles Iran has been able to launch. Well, yeah, but you notice something? They're not hitting any fewer targets. In fact, the hits seem to be coming more frequently and in more power in recent days than they were at the beginning because they've exhausted a lot of the interceptors, and so their missiles may be exhausted, but only one missile has to or drone has to get through to cause incredible damage. It's a question of what Iran has been targeting, and they're going to target more vulnerable and more impactful energy sites if that's what they do. It doesn't make any sense that MBS would want this war to continue. Um, the costs to the Gulf states have already been enormous, right? You're losing enormous amounts of revenue every single day. You're losing enormous amounts of product in the attacks. Um, Markets are already feeling the pinch, and it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. It's not only oil, it's also fertilizer and the whole prospect. I mean, MBS is all about his Vision 2030. He's all about diversifying the Saudi economy. Well, this is putting a devastating blow on that, not just in a material sense, but in the sense that people are now going to be much more reluctant to invest in Saudi Arabia. Now, the argument would be that that's why he wants Iran to be disempowered, but that doesn't make any sense either. Because, disempowering Iran in a devastating war is not going to bring stability to the region. It's not going to make the region more stable. Is certainly given Israel's behavior in Lebanon and Syria, uh, there's going to be an increase in non-state actor violence, which is the key point of instability in the region. It's the biggest thing that outside investors look at when they're thinking about, are they going into a war zone? They're not looking at interstate fights so much as they're looking at intrastate fights or states versus non-state actors. That's what characterizes conflict in most of the Middle East these days. So none of it makes any sense. Why, MBS, Trump may be an idiot. MBS is not. So none of it makes any sense. And the article itself comes up with a lot of these points, which is, kind of tells me that there's some disagreement either between the editors and the writers, or between the various. There's several writers on the article. There may be a bunch of different views here. The whole thing just really is not very credible. The biggest argument is that Iran can't be allowed to continue to hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage. I mean, that has been a big point, certainly, and the United Arab Emirates is making that point a lot as well. But that has not been a problem. I mean, the Iran, just geographically, there's nothing that Iran has built to control the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, it's geography. It's just the way it's where the strait is and where Iran is. That's why they have this control. So there isn't a whole lot you can do about that without regime change, first of all. And it hasn't been a problem until now. It's been a threat. It's been a good reason why nobody was stupid enough to attack Iran until now. But if the war ends and people and there's an agreement to not attack Iran, and Iran feels like they're not about to be attacked, the strait's going to open. Iran has no interest in keeping the strait closed just for the spite of it. That doesn't help Iran in any way. So um, the solution is stop attacking Iran. That's the solution to this, to the Strait of Hormuz. And I think, in the end, there's going to be, I think the way when this war eventually does come to an end, I think there's going to be some sort of agreement on the Strait of Hormuz. It's not going to be jointly controlled by Donald Trump and the Ayatollah, which again, there are, by the way, Ayatollah does not mean supreme leader, just so people know. Uh, Ayatollah is a religious designation. There's more than one Ayatollah in Iran. There's only one supreme leader. His name remains Khamenei. So just talk about regime changes. No, but there, this isn't this is this is an issue that you can't get around. You can't change geography. Geography is what it is, and Iran is going to have a say in the Strait of Hormuz, no matter how this war ends. All right, so this all raises the question: if the story is fake news, as I believe it is, I can't prove it. And I want to be very clear: I'm not making an affirmative claim here because I can't prove that it's fake. But I'm pretty certain that it is, and I'm confident in saying that you'd have to really show me some much better proof that it's real. But the question then remains: why plant it? What's the point of planning it? I mean, theoretically, this would be something that was planted by the Trump administration. Well, we're about to enter a new phase of the war that is going to include ground troops. That seems clear. Now, to what extent, we don't know. Right now, Trump has sent a few thousand specialized troops to the region, which certainly looks like they're going to, it may not be Karg Island, but there are several islands around Iran that the United States may try to take. I think that is going to be a very, very foolish idea because, as many, I'm no military expert, but I do listen to them. And the ones I'm hearing, many of whom are very, very much right-wing people, are saying that if you do this, it's not that the United States can't take these islands. Of course we can. But it's going to come at the cost of American lives. There's no question about that. Um, launching these kinds of offensives, even with the best troops and even with the best equipment and all of that stuff, you, by definition, have to go out in the open and invade a territory where the defenders are already there. Whatever defenses are already there and planted in their spaces, you're going to get people killed, even in the best case scenario. Um, that does not bode well for Donald Trump. The As bad as it is that he's already broken his promise to many of his constituents who still back this war, by the way. The last poll I saw still had MAGA Republicans overwhelmingly supporting this war, and even non-MAGA Republicans, it was something like seven out of 10 that still supported this war. So, a larger number opposed it, but the Republicans are still supporting this war. But I'm going to tell you, Americans start dying. That's going to be a different story. That is going to be a very, very different story because, when you think about who joins the army, on the whole, you're going to get a lot more Republican kids than Democrat kids. The parents, I'm saying the parents of the young men and women in the military are going to tend, of course, many Democrats also have kids in the military. I'm not saying not, but there is an obvious tendency those parents will more often be Republicans. And when their kids are the ones dying, you're going to see this change really fast. I'm not saying, again, that it's going to completely reverse the numbers, but Trump's going to lose considerable support uh, as a result of any ground invasion. So, if he's going to do that, one of the things he is, I think, trying to do is, build now, sort of retroactively build a case for the whole war, really. And the whole line that started with Marco Rubio and then the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, that Israel pushed the United States. I have another video on this. I'll link to it in the description. But the funny thing about it is how look, I have no doubt that the key factor in getting Trump to get into this war was Benjamin Netanyahu talking to him and telling him it'll be quick, it'll be easy, we'll kill the leadership, the government will collapse, we have all these Iranians who have been out in the street who will then rush to replace it with a different government, much like what we saw in 1979 when they overthrew the Shah. Um, and you'll have basically another Venezuela, and then suddenly we'll have a friendly government in Iran. I'm sure that that is what happened. I don't think it was pressure. I don't think it was tricks or anything like that. I think Netanyahu simply made his case to Trump why he should do this. I'm sure it was a little different case than he ever made to Joe Biden or to Barack Obama or to George W. Bush, or to Bill Clinton to do the same thing. But I'm sure he tailored it more to Trump, but basically it's the same case he's always made. Yes, I'm sure that happened, and I'm also sure that Marco Rubio was kind of stuck and scrambling for an answer as to why Trump did this because he didn't have a good answer. Because he sure as hell didn't want to say, well, Israel said we should. And then he did basically said Israel said we had no choice. That's what he went to. And I think Mike Johnson basically echoed that. And it took on, more of a life of its own about Israel controlling U.S. foreign policy, which is nonsense, and simply not true, which is not to say that again, Israel lobby, very powerful. There's no question about that. But Congress had nothing to do with this. And that's where the Israel lobby's power is. In any case, that line is not working. Okay, it is causing a split in the GOP. It is causing a split in the MAGA movement. And so Trump wants to find something else that can explain this. And if he says, look, all these Arab states where we're getting so much of the world's oil supply from, ironically, it's Asia and China that get more of it from the Persian Gulf, but okay. But he's going to say, look, still, it's a global market, and as we see, the prices, of oil are affected here. Not to mention, other things that come out of the Gulf states, including most notably fertilizer, the future for AI that Trump and his cronies have invested a lot in. A lot of that was centered in Gulf states as well. So that all these states have a real importance for U.S. Interests, according for U.S. interests, according to Trump, and according to also more broad interests. And he would make the case: look, they're telling us this is so important, and look how important it really is. And he can make number one, a less Israel controls us case, and also a less ideological case, and a more practical one. So I think that is something that he's doing, especially now with ground troops looming. How much, I still think, we haven't seen yet mass movements of troops towards the Gulf. So any larger uh, expenditure of American lives is probably a ways down the road. But this war isn't ending anytime soon, despite what Trump is saying. So, um, and 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 another reason I think for this is just in general to bring in other players because Israel is going to be playing a much more a much more prominent role in the whole question of when the war ends than it has up until now, where people have really focused on Iran and the United States. But Israel's the spoiler in all of this. Um, so from and here's where I think MBS has a legitimate and serious concern because if the U.S. Right now it pulls out and decides, okay, we're done. We've done what we need to do. I can sell this as a victory. I'm leaving. Um, that doesn't mean Israel's going to stop necessarily. I mean, that Israel on its own probably would keep pursuing some sort of lower level conflict with Iran. It can't sustain anything like the assault on Iran that we've seen so far without massive U.S. support and actual U.S. involvement. But it can continue to hit Iran with missiles and things of that nature. Iran's anti-missile defense is nowhere near. I mean, this is the big advantage that Israel and the United States have. Their air defense, defense against missiles, defense against aircraft, is just nowhere near as strong as the U.S. and Israel. And so, attacks are more effective against them, and Israel can continue to launch missiles at Iran and that can continue to go back and forth. Plus, um, and well, and as long as that's continuing, Saudi Arabia and the other GCC states are caught in the middle, just like they are right now. Will Iran continue to retaliate against the Gulf states if Israel continues attacking them and the U.S. has pulled out? I don't know for sure because the excuse of the United States being part of that wouldn't necessarily be there, although they can certainly craft one because it's U.S. A major U.S. ally, and in fact the U.S. backing will still exist politically, and will still be selling Israel weapons and etc. So they can certainly make that case. Uh, they may stop attacking Gulf countries and just shoot it out with Israel back and forth with missiles. That's possible too. I mean, we'll have to see. I think it's more likely that Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states are going to be much more vulnerable in that situation. And that's something that MBS is probably concerned about. So, in that sense, I think he doesn't want the U.S. to pull out and leave Israel to its own devices. I think that's more. If there is some truth to this, I think that's where it lies. Um, then, then there's the question of would the strait be reopened? I mean, one would think the U.S. won't pull out unless the strait is reopened. And that's fine. I think that's probably the case. And I think that it is not unreasonable to think that if the U.S. is really willing to stop its attacks, there is some way. I mean, I think it'll depend a lot on other conditions and what else the U.S. is willing to do to appease Iran. But I think there's a way to work things out that the strait could be opened in response, although reopening is a relative term. It can be reopened, but will all ships necessarily be allowed to go through? Will ships, for example, right now the UAE has completely thrown in with Israel and the United States in a way that the other Gulf states have not. So will Emirati ships be permitted through the Gulf? Uh, will any, will there need to be some sort of, will there be some sort of barring of ships that have any contact with Israel? Uh, uh, you know, there's a lot that Iran can do to regulate what the passage through the straits. They've done it, and we've seen this before, and that also raises the question. So far, Ansar Allah in the Houthis in Yemen, they've not been involved. They have stayed quiet. That powder remains dry. And one gets the sense, and I'm pretty sure this is the case, that's one of a few things that Iran is still holding in reserve in case, as they may need more resources as the war goes on, may need to open other fronts. And we've already seen the amount of control that Ansar Allah can exert over the Red Sea, which is another key shipping area. So I think we need to look at that. Now, there's also the question of Lebanon. Iran has said that one of their conditions for ending the war is that war basically, they didn't put it. They said that stop attacking or stop declaring war on allied groups and states. They may mean other things besides Lebanon, but Lebanon's the big one. And it's very clear. I mean, Israel clearly has no intention of stopping this. They have basically emptied southern Lebanon of Lebanese. They have forced 1 million people to leave their homes and move north of the Litani River. They have moved in and occupied it. They have already said they're not leaving anytime soon. Bezalel Smotrich has already talked about settling southern Lebanon with Jewish settlements. And the talk is of making the Litani River Israel's new northern border. And that has not been met with much pushback, I have to say. So I think that's going to embolden the Israeli far right. And in any case, I think we can certainly see that's not stopping anytime soon. It can stop. The United States can stop it anytime it wants. We know this, that the United States can exert real pressure on Israel and just say, this is it. You're not doing this. But do we really see Trump doing that, even if he wants this off ramp? I don't. I mean, it just doesn't seem very realistic to me. I think doing something like that would, how would Miriam Adelson and her, $250 million donations to GOP campaigns feel about that? So there's every reason to think that Trump wants an off ramp, Trump can't find an off ramp, and Trump is trying to change the narrative so that there's more of a case that we have to keep fighting Iran until they're defeated. Um, I think that's where this has gone, and I think that's why we've seen this story planted in the Times. And if I'm going to leave you with one thought, it is that, with everything that's going on, and we all know, I think even many Trump supporters, I think, know that you don't take what this guy says as the truth. You listen to everything he says with a skeptical ear. I think we have to broaden that to the mainstream media and in a time of war. It's one thing when it's politics. I think in general, you can read the Times and even the Washington Post, as degraded as that outlet has become. I think you can read these things with an eye toward the politics and understanding political bias that is in any media source, and you can look at it and expect basically facts. You may need to have some context around the facts that they may not include, et cetera. But when you're talking about outright lies, I think in the normal times you don't see a lot of just outright lies in the Times. You see distortions, you see things out of context, you see things missing important facts, but you don't see outright lies. I think in times of war, you do see outright lies, or when covering a war. So it can, the times when it's really, moments when it's really big. So it can be the Iraq War, it can be the Iran War, it can also be the genocide in Gaza. When you're seeing these things, that's when you need to keep your eyes open for outright fabrications. That's when they've happened in the past, and I think that's what's happened here. So I think we need to have that understanding when we're consuming our media. And this article about MBS pushing Trump to continue the war, I think, is a really, really prime example. Look, it could turn out that it's true. I'm not going to say I can't, say it with 100% certainty, but there is every reason to think that this is a planted false story. So leave it there. Unfortunately, there's going to be a lot more for me to say about everything that's going on right now. But for the moment, I think we can, we can just look at that and have some lessons about the media. Please like, subscribe, do all that good stuff because it really does make a difference. It allows me to continue doing this work. If you can support the work that you can see on the screen now, you can go to mitchellplitnick.substack.com, become a paid subscriber. You can go to ko-fi.com, look for my name, Mitchell Plitnick, and you can make a one-time donation there to support this work. So anything you can do will be deeply appreciated. And if all you can do is like, share, subscribe, tell your friends about these videos, that's deeply appreciated too, and it helps just as much. So thanks, and let's hope there's some better news somewhere down the road.